Hi there, and welcome back to the GL1100 project. It's the 29th of December. I hope you've had a reasonable Christmas considering what's going on with the virus and everything around the world. But as long as you're okay, that's the main thing. In the last video, my son John and I got the engine stripped down to the casing, but then we realised that because the engine was seized, it still wasn't turning. We didn't know what the actual problem was inside, and normally you can just lift the left-hand casing off once all the bolts are out and everything. A little bit of sort of tapping and stuff and get them off the dowels, and off it would come. This casing wasn't moving whatsoever. Hence the reason why I've done a separate video for this. It did actually take around about 2.5 hours to get the casing split, and I've condensed it into around about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So hope you enjoy, and gives you a bit of information. Thanks again for all the feedback. Had some really good feedback from people. There doesn't seem to be a lot of videos with flat fours being stripped on YouTube or wherever on the media. So hopefully it's giving people a bit of some information and insight into in stripping this engine and the rest of the bike when we get the engine done, getting everything back up and running with the rest of the bike too. We've still got the brakes and cooling system, everything, all the rest of it. It's a very big project, but I hope you'll tag along and stick with us. Cheers. Okay, so this was the last bit of the video off from vlog 3, which was the second part of taking the engine apart. I'm sure you've been following them all, but just in case you hadn't, we still think that at least one of the pistons of the 4 is seized in the barrel, and this is where we're going to have a problem getting them apart. It's been sat for a while as well. There's a lot of dowels in there, which you've got to basically break the dowels off the casing as well. So going to take quite a while. The manual says to have the left-hand casing on the top, which I'll show you in a minute. We're just sort of assessing the situation at the moment and just seeing whether you can see my hat is smurfing away. John's got me a new one for Christmas. It's much better. Look like a smurf. Anyway, so that's the way that the manual suggests you do it. Now, if nothing was seized, you should just be able to, once all the bolts are off, a few taps and it should just lift up and come off, because everything's bolted to the right hand part of the casing. However, due to the difficulty of trying to get this apart, what we've done is we span it round so the right hand case with everything bolted to it, the crank and everything else and the gearbox and everything inside, is on the top. We put a bar through where the clutch push rod that goes through the engine, we put a bar in there. Looks like that clutch shaft is substantial. So the reason why we had it round that way initially is because there was no other way of actually suspending the engine on axle stands the other way round. The other side we left the bolting on the crankshaft, so the bolts basically sat there. And we're using a piece of wood and a hide hammer. Any screwdrivers or levers we're using, there are lugs on the outside. We're not touching the actual crank casing where the gaskets are or anything. There's actually lugs on the outside where you can just sort of gently just maneuver it and see whether it's a long process. As I said, it's due to at least one of these pistons being seized or something of that ilk. I don't know why it started going cloudy, the filming here, because it cleared up again, so I do apologise for that, but this just speeded up because this was a good sort of half an hour, 40 minutes trying to as you can see, it's starting to move. John's just hitting one of the engine mounting lugs, and you can see that it's actually lifting a bit. Didn't really like having it this way round because, you know, it's, but needs must. Whoop. We all make mistakes. Yeah. As I said, it wasn't ideal having it that way round, but due to the pistons being seized and with trying to have the engine suspended on axle stands, that was the only way we could do it initially. Was it worth spinning it round? And you should be able to get some small wedges and stuff.
Yeah, you can do that.
Would be better rather than punching it straight over.
Yeah.
So we thought, well, okay, that's enough of that. And we decided then to turn it round the way it should be, to take the left-hand casing off. So it's back up the right way around now. As I said, I'll say it again, usually if the pistons weren't seized, once you've started moving the casing off the dowels, it would just, the top casing would just lift off. You can see the lugs. You can see the lugs there. Now that's just sat on the outside of the engine. We're not actually damaging any of the seals of the crank casing themselves. Put a bit of plus gas into the pistons. Fair bit of that had been going in. I put some over Christmas, hoping that that would free it up a bit. Well, what if? Now, at this moment, I really wish I had some plastic wedges, which you can buy online from various outlets. But to be honest, I don't think the plastic wedges would have done a lot either. What we found basically was that left hand corner where John's tapping now, that dowel was seized solid, and until we got that dowel off, when we got that dowel off, then it would start moving a bit more. And as you can see, it is moving about now. So we're just on the outside lugs, not really going in to any part of the inner part of the casings. Don't want to damage the casings at all. Now normally, now that it's off the dowels, that casing should just lift off straight up with the pistons. Would be lubricated, the piston rings and the actual inside of the barrel, the liners, and that would just lift off. You'll see later on, but both the pistons were seized. So we're having to just use pieces of wood, split a few pieces of wood, putting them in, just working our way through. No other way of doing it really. I'm sure someone will comment on other ways of doing it. We did think of trying to hang the left hand casing up off the bench, but apart from rigging up some special frame that you could most probably hang up with the from the head bolts or something like that, it just wasn't going to happen. So John started hitting the pistons, and it started lifting the actual casing. So basically you're pushing down on the piston and it was lifting the cases up. It looks a bit brutal, but those pistons were not moving.
It's pushing down, this one's pushing up and it's pulling it with it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, as John said, as you're hitting, he was hitting the left hand piston, that was pushing down on the crank and lifting, because the other one was seized solid, so lifting the casing up, which is good, as you can see. Now, when we got to this point, the whole left hand crankcase on the top was moving backwards and forwards, which showed you that the actual crank itself was not seized. It was just the pistons that were seized in the barrel, which gave us a bit of hope. So it was just a matter of putting more wood in. Doesn't matter if you smash the wood, it's not going to damage the casings. So John's just breaking some more wood up. I said ideally the best way of this would have been to get some plastic wedges. In hindsight, I should have made sure I had some before we did this. We were using a block of wood. It was just the wood was just getting splitting all the time when you were hitting the piston, so we're just using a 4-pound hammer, using the wooden end. John's just hitting it with the hide mallet.
You can't be far away.
Let me try the other pistons to try and help me that unseized. If this ends up being out, you get that one unseized. I think. Yeah, I can be wrong. Yep.
We were hitting the rear piston on that casing. It wasn't moving. All it was doing was pushing it down. There's videos of engineers having to use 5-ton presses to actually get seized pistons out of barrels. So a hammer and a hide mallet, we're not doing too bad really. As soon as he hits it, it's pushing that casing up. Unfortunately, if it damages the piston, I just have to get a new piston, because there was no way of getting this apart. So then we had enough room to actually get the handles of some of the bars that we were using, like the rubber handle there on the screwdriver. That's where the dowel fell out. I'll explain in a minute. And the other side with John with the pry bar, and you could get it in onto the crank itself. Won't damage anything. All you're doing is just leaving it upwards, and up it went. And that was one piston off. That was only one piston. The other one is sat maybe an inch or two up, because the pistons are independent on the same crank, but the one's with the 4-stroke, one's going down while the other one's going up. And you can see that the whole crank is free. So I thought I'd try to turn the crank with a spanner, just to see whether it would move, and then it would push the other piston, but to no avail. It was absolutely rock solid. We could have done with taking the starter chain off really, but I don't know why we didn't. I think we just left it there so it didn't get lost. It's not getting in the way. I mentioned earlier about something falling out of the casing from that still. There is a dowel on the right hand side of the engine as you're looking at it, which actually fell out. I think it's back somewhere on the video. It falls out, it's got a little O-ring around it. I think it's an oil feed way going from one crank casing to the other. I didn't notice it fall out. I saw it on the bench. We'll make sure that we put that back in. So we're just trying to lift it, that last bit, to get this other piston off. Just won't come up at all. It looks like we're in the middle of the engine, but we're not. John's on the near side from what we're seeing there. I'm on the far side. Couldn't really. It was really difficult to to get it. We only had around about half an inch left to go, and the piston was still seized. So right. You've got to be careful lifting like this, because although those lugs look pretty meaty on the outside, you could still break them. They could still break. So it was right. Okay, last go. You've got the wood on that side. I'll lever it. You keep hold of it, and we'll give it one final shunt upwards. And bang, the piston came out. Joy of joys. So I'm just trying to get the end off, and off it came. Yeah, fantastic. Then John took the camera, just took it over. You can see the barrel, you can see the two barrels there, how much rust is in the bottom of those. But he'll take the camera over now and show you. All the piston rings were all free. Everything was free. There was nothing wrong with that side of it. It was just, they were just seized. As you can see, just a lot of rust in there. And the reason why the engine was seized was because those two small ends, the gudgeon pins, are not moving. The crank's moving, big end's moving, and actually you can turn that, and the other two pistons are going up and down on the right hand side. You can't see them because they're underneath, but yeah, little tap, they're not doing anything. Those two pistons, the small ends, are solid. So I think something's happened in the past. Either it's overheated or it's had oil starvation up at that end, or it could have just have been condensation over the years if it's been stood for a long time and the small ends have just locked up solid. So there we go. As you can see, normally if all the pistons and the gudgeon pins and the small end and the top end and whatever you want to call it was all free, it most probably would be a lot easier to actually pull that left hand casing off. But with those pistons being seized on the gudgeon pin on the small end, as you could tell, that was the problem. So now it's great. Casings are off. We need to just start taking the crank out, cleaning everything up, making sure the bearings and the big end bearings and everything are okay, and that the other barrels are okay as well. But it seems to be as soon as we got that left hand casing off, everything started moving. So with a bit of luck, we get those barrels honed out. We'll check the other barrels out, make sure they're okay, and we should be good for putting it back together. Wish you all a happy new year for 2021, and hopefully it's going to be a better one than we've had this year. Take care, ride safe, and we'll talk soon. Cheers. Thank you.